Midterm votes matter.
Hello, and welcome to the 2022 Good Trouble Voting Rights Podcast, sponsored by Black Women for Positive Change, featuring host Dr. Georgia Dunston and co-host Dr. Stephanie Myers. Ladies, take it away.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Black Women for Positive Change 2022 Good Trouble Voting Rights Podcast. Few can deny that we are living in an era of grave national crisis, at a time of unprecedented domestic political violence, when our American constitutional democracy is under attack by powerful spiritual forces. And we, as African Americans, hear and must heed the voice of our recently deceased former Congressman John Lewis, who called us to get involved in good trouble for such a time as this, to redeem the soul of our nation. This Black Women for Positive Change 2022 Good Trouble Voting Rights Podcast is the place where we come together in community every second and fourth Wednesday of the month to talk and share national and local perspectives on strategic actions for voter rights to save our American constitutional form of government and discuss political actions affecting women's and individual rights. I am Dr. Georgia M. Dunston, Chair of the Black Women for Positive Change Science Committee and co-chair of our Voter Rights Subcommittee. I'm here today as host of this Black Women for Positive Change 2022 Good Trouble podcast. I'm joined by today's co-host, Dr. Stephanie Myers, co-founder and national co-chair of Black Women for Positive Change, and Honorable Jan Perry, Chair of Black Women for Positive Change Social Justice Committee. And our esteemed guest host panelist today is Attorney Barbara Arnwine, founder and president of Transformative Justice Coalition. I will ask each of our panelists to introduce themselves and give a word of greeting to our listening audience, beginning with my recurring co-host for this podcast, Dr. Stephanie Myers.
Thank you, Dr. Dunston, and hello to all of the people who are joining us for our Good Trouble podcast. This is the month of July 2022, and we're going through congressional hearings right now about the behavior of the former president of the United States. And if there was ever an urgent reason to vote in the midterm elections, to vote in the 2024 elections, and to vote for the rest of your life, it's to make sure that our democracy is safe. And when you listen to those hearings, you can hear example after example how there are people in this country that are trying to destroy the right to vote, destroy the democracy in America. So today we are very pleased to have two outstanding women who are experts in how public policy, how the laws of the country work, how voting works, so we can engage in this dialogue. As Dr. Dunston said, I'm Stephanie Myers. I'm the national co-chair of Black Women for Positive Change. I'm also a businesswoman and own a small publishing company with my husband. And I've worked in both the federal government as a political appointee and as an activist. So with that, I would like to ask our two special guests today to introduce themselves, and then we will get started with some questions. So starting with Jan Perry, Honorable Jan Perry, Please introduce yourself so the audience knows who you are.
Hi, everybody. My name is Jan Perry, and I am a chair of the Social Justice Committee for Black Women for Positive Change. I'm excited to join you today to talk about the act of voting and why it's important. I have over 30 years of experience as a public servant, a former elected official, a former manager of economic and workforce development, and currently the director of 2 nonprofits that deal with homelessness and infrastructure development. I'm also very engaged in the work of Black Women for Positive Change and the de-escalation of violence, not only locally, but nationally. So it's an honor to be here to dialogue with the listeners about this very important issue, the power that we hold within our own hands, and that's the power to vote.
Okay, and we're very proud to know that you are in the midterm runoffs as a candidate for the congressional seat for the 37th district in Los Angeles. So we're glad you were able to join us. Our next guest this afternoon is going to be with an outstanding civil rights lawyer who just battles the battle in the streets wherever she finds it. So Attorney Barbara Arnwine, please introduce yourself and thank you for being with us today.
Thank you so much for having me. And thanks for all the great work that the Black Women for Positive Change does all around the country. And it's an honor to join you today. I am Barbara Arnwine, the president and founder of the Transformative Justice Coalition. Prior to joining or starting the Transformative Justice Coalition, I was the president of the Lawyers Committee for Civil Rights Under Law and still serve as President Emeritus of the Lawyers Committee for Civil Rights Under Law. It is such an honor to fight on behalf of our communities all around the country who are seeking to make sure that their vote can be cast and counted. It is an incredible moment in history for this nation. As with demographic change, we are now confronting people who want to change the nature of the democracy so that it's not a democracy that is run by the plurality of the people, but instead is a democracy, in fact, not even a democracy, some other form of government, plutocracy, kleptocracy, you name it, that is run by a minority, a white dominant minority. And that's their philosophy. That's the fight that we got. And it is on all levels. We have legislative battles, court battles, and of course, on the ground electoral battles. It is an incredible period in history. It's one to which we all have to rise and do our best to make sure that democracy continues in the United States.
Dr. Dunston, I'd like to open up with a question here, if you don't mind. Why are people not voting now? Attorney Arnwine and Jan Perry, please tell us what the heck is going on. I am hearing every time this conversation comes up, people say, oh, I don't know, it doesn't matter if I vote, it doesn't mean anything. Would you please tell us, why does it matter if people vote today or don't vote? What difference does it make?
I think it makes a huge difference. You know, having just gone through a primary where the person who came in third was not that far behind me. I remember telling my volunteers, keep calling, we keep calling people and asking them to get out to the polls and vote. Here in Los Angeles County, we are a 100% vote by mail county. So we don't even have to pay for the stamps. So there's no reason why people cannot vote. I think what people don't really realize is their vote is the only thing they have to fight back against special interest money. And when you see a campaign that is bombarding, literally carpet bombing your community with mail and TV ads, you need to look very, very carefully at where that mail is coming from. And it's usually in the upper left-hand corner, somewhere on the mail piece. And then you need to Google it and look at the website and examine it and see where the source of money is coming from. And then you need to decide whether you're comfortable with that or not. Because I'm going to tell you, 9 times out of 10, you're probably not going to be comfortable because it's coming from outside of your community, in many cases outside of your city or state. And they're interests that are attempting to gain leverage in your community. And so the only thing that you have, it's free, it's your vote. Your vote, you have to cast your vote to push back on that. Most of us don't have money to fight these special interests, oil, gas, you name it. I'm not going to go into the long list, but I think we all know what they are. And your vote's the only thing you've got.
Okay.
And so
thank
if you waste it by not casting it, then you're giving in to special interests. You're actually doing exactly what special interests want you to do, which is to not vote, because you feel an avalanche of mail and TV commercials, and then you give up, you go, oh God, I can't win against that, when in fact you can.
Okay.
It's right there at your fingertips.
Well, I want to interrogate the question a little bit more, because to begin with, we just came off of the largest voter turnout in the second largest voter turnout in the history of the United States in 2020. We have to never forget that. The second largest ever since 1901, I believe, 1902, something like that. So it's important for us to, and the people did this in the midst of COVID. People turned out and voted like never before seen. Now, here's the reality is that in off cycle, as they call it, general elections for midterms, there's always a tremendous drop off in voters participation. We want to break that cycle, right? But you can't predict anything as to what will happen in November based on these primaries, because the primaries always are horribly low during a midterm election. I think they're totally unpredictable of how people will actually show up for the general election in November, where you now have parties going against each other versus internal party questions about who should be the nominee for that party. So I think that it's unpredictable. But I can say this, that we know that for voters, it's a harder reality for them in 2022 than it was in 2020. These states have passed all these voter suppression laws. Some 19 states have passed 35 laws. As we currently talk, there are 538 voter suppression laws pending in the states right now as we talk. So state legislatures are making it harder for people to vote. That's one of the real problems. See, I don't blame the people, because I just left Europe, where they have 90% voter turnout? But why do they have 90% voter turnout? Because the government does everything it can to encourage people to vote. Our governments barely make sure people even know when there's an election day. Not to mention the failure to educate voters, to send them sample ballots. Heck, we got states where it's illegal to send a sample ballot to a voter. I mean, all of these problems are, I think, governmental. Because in states like the 15 states in the nation that have what we call AVR, or automatic voter registration, you have the highest voter turnout, because people turn out because they know that the state wants them to vote. That's part of the problem here, is that the reality is that a whole lot of people don't want everyone to vote. And we got to be realistic about that. And the fact that people get it in their heads that that's what's happening to them is true. The last thing I'm going to say is unique to the Black community, not just our community, it's probably true in the brown communities and the Native American communities to an extent also. And that is that we have this incredibly oppressive reality of felon disenfranchisement. A quarter of all eligible Black male voters are not able to vote because of confusion or real blockage based on their having been formerly incarcerated or are involved in the criminal justice system, and they're confused. They think they cannot vote when many of them can vote. Some 18 million people out there of all races confused about their right to vote. because they were formerly incarcerated. Huge percentage of Black voters are affected. And what do? They go home and they tell people don't vote. They tell people because they themselves are personally hurt by the fact that they can't vote, that they don't think they can vote. And they tell their families that voting doesn't matter because they don't want to admit to the pain that it causes them not to be able to vote. So we got all kinds of issues here. It's not an easy, a simple thing of telling people just vote. It's a whole lot of institutional and other structural obstacles that are at play. And I totally concur with Jan Perry that also, we got to create in our people a greater sense that, regardless of all this, that we have to be different. We have to vote.
Dr. Dunston?
Well, I bring the perspective of a trained human geneticist. And many people have asked me, how does genomic science relate to voting? And I'm here to say that voting is indeed our voice in a constitutional form of government. And our voice is how we are heard. We have to vote to be heard in a constitutional democratic form of government. I'm very pleased that our greatest inheritance as African Americans is this nation's constitutional democracy form of government of the people, by the people, and for the people, based on the divinely inspired principle that all human beings are created equal, that we are endowed by our Creator with certain inalienable rights, that among these are life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. Genetics and genomics is about who we are, our identity, and our inheritance. The link between genomics and genetics is knowing who we are and knowing that we have purpose in being. This is no common time in history. This is actually described as the genome era, which means it's a time where all people globally are thinking about who we are and why we are.
Well, that's very, very important. That is very, very critical. And I'd like to ask you and ask our guests if they can describe an example, a specific example where a law was affected by the vote of the people. Can you think of an example? Because just like we're saying, people don't get the connection between voting and how they live. Can you give an example where you see that the change in a law affects people?
Well, I'm definitely going to defer to our outspoken activist and community organizer and an attorney. And I would really love to hear your comment here, Attorney Barbara Arnwine.
Well, I think voters affect everything. People just don't understand that, having the power to vote, what it did, what it's done in this country just to have the 60 plus members of the Congressional Black Caucus. People don't think about that if you go back to the worst suppression eras, 1901, George White leaves Congress, there are no Blacks until, somewhere in the 1920s. And then all of a sudden, after, you get your first, African-American congressman post-Reconstruction, there are no Blacks out of the South elected into 1965. What happened, folks? It's called the Voting Rights Act of 1965. And since then, there's been this growing voice. If there was no Black congressional caucus, let me assure you that a lot of things that we understand, such as stimulus for the people, to give people help and assistance, the Child Care Credit Act, none of that would exist because a lot of the leadership has come out of the progressive wing of the Congressional Black Caucus. We also have to understand, and we voted for them. We put them in office, the majority of them. But at the same time, they've been, that we got some new ones who have been so creative that they have really won the vote of progressive whites heavily. And so they are also in that caucus making a change. I would say the voice of Black women in Congress. This whole focus on maternal health, because Black women are dying at a greater rate in childbirth, is a direct result of the voices of people like Sheila Jackson Lee, people like the mighty, amazing Maxine Waters out of Los Angeles, people, who have like Ayanna Pressley and all of these others who have taken that issue on. When we talk about people being our voice, our representatives being our voice, that's the importance. And let me tell you, with this new case confronting us, Moore versus Harper, who our representatives are will count more than it's ever counted in the history of this country. And I can go into that later, but I want people to understand that everything that we care about, when I get up in the morning and I look at whether or not my trash has been collected, that has to do with who we elect. When I look at whether or not the children can get to school, if they have buses, are they being instructed well? Do they have the right supplies, the right materials? All of that goes to our vote. When I look at the street lights that I have to stop at, all of that has to do with somebody I voted for who's regulating every single thing, what we eat, who makes sure our food is fresh and not toxic and contagious. All of that is based on our vote. I had to go overseas just recently. My passport, the entirety of the customs system, everything is regulated by your vote. Don't think that just because you can get up in the morning and you don't have to be worried about things, your TV, your internet, everything you use is regulated. The electricity that you got, the power, the water, everything is regulated by government. So don't think that somehow you live in an isolated island. I'm sorry, you don't, because everything you do, government has had some role in it. And that's what people need to really understand. And I like to control my life. So I want to know who's making those decisions that are affecting me. And that's how everyone should be thinking.
Jan Perry, would you like to add to that? Have you seen examples of why the vote is essential?
Well, I think Attorney Arnwine has done an excellent job of covering it at all levels of government, from federal to state to county to local, and it's all the same. That your vote at all levels will affect the quality of your life on a daily basis on issues both large and small, and it also is derived from the census that goes on every 10 years, and we count the population, and then we draw the lines for redistricting to determine political representation. And if your population shifts or moves, or in the case of California, we lost some population, so we lost a congressional seat. All that goes into play because wherever we lost a seat here, it went somewhere else to another state that possibly went against the interests of the people here in this state, because collectively, we all vote at the federal level and it affects the entire country. So that's why people need to pay attention to what goes on in New York, Texas, Georgia, California, all that, because it's got a domino effect.
Okay.
Dr. Myers, I would like to underscore the fact that our podcast, we will be addressing what we call hot topics with regard
right.
to midterms. And for us, hot topic stands for healing our thinking. Healing our thinking. There's nothing that's more in the news today than mental health. And it's important. As the geneticist, I can say genetics deals with the health of our bodies. How we vote impacts our representatives that will develop legislature and that will impact our health, which is very important. Not only our physical health, and we know the kinds of disparities that exist in our population with regard to health differences, but also mental health. This is a big area, particularly as we are in this time that I referred to as unprecedented time for domestic violence. We haven't looked at violence itself as a disorder, as a disease. And I submit that it is a mental disorder. It is a behavior. And one thing that our science shows, that health disparities are caused by determinants of behavior. One of the major factors in health is our behavior. The choices we make about the food we eat, where we live, our education, and all of these things are affected by voting at the local, at the state, and at the federal level for representatives who make sure that our interests as families, as communities, and as a nation of diverse peoples are addressed. So I just wanted to get that genetics view that health, which impacts all of us, is a major consequence of our voting.
And Dr. Dunston, you mentioned the federal level, and I'd like to ask our guest, what impact does voting have on the Supreme Court? We just went through this Roe versus Wade decision. Does voting affect the Supreme Court in any way?
Absolutely. Absolutely. I mean, that's one thing that we have to really teach, and that is voting for judges. The nature of our judiciary at both the state level and at the federal level is all devoted, it's all based on who we voted for. And one of the realities for us is that right now, the reason why people went for Trump, even though they knew he had issues, was because they understood that he would pack the court with conservative justices, and he got that opportunity. And he packed the court with Kavanaugh, Barrett, all of these, horrible Gorsuch, all these really conservative justices who we knew were, anti-choice, who we knew are anti-civil rights, and that was their goal. Yet, when we run for office, many people don't think about the judges, because the judge is going to decide. Right now, folks are about to suffer. Women are suffering all over this country. I was just reading about a poor woman from Australia who came through the United States, and she was questioned about whether or not she was here to get an abortion. They deported her with no evidence of anything. That's what's happening, people, because we have these radical justices who are voting against the interests of the people. They just voted that New York could not regulate guns. 70% of people want guns regulated in this country, 70% of the voters, yet the Supreme Court, sitting in this little isolated world of conservatism, decides that they're not going to allow for those private manufacturers of guns to be held accountable by a state or by a city. I mean, this is a real problem, folks. I mean, everything that we want, if we got a Supreme Court in the background saying you can't do it, then we're gonna have problems. And right now they're threatening to totally change the way our voting works in this country. They want to have three of them on the Supreme Court want to support what's called the independent state legislature doctrine, which means that anything a state legislature does, redistricting or any law that it passes regarding elections, no one can challenge it. No one. That's what that theory means. You can't even have the state Supreme Court hold them accountable. They would be immune. They would be absolutely exempted from any oversight regarding anything electoral. And that is what this court is considering right this moment. And what will be the biggest case of this upcoming term, the biggest case of this decade. That's why judges matter, people, because if they adopt this theory, then fighting for voting rights, fighting for legislation will be a huge problem of making sure that the states are required to comply with it, because the court is going to say they're not. So this is a huge problem, and we are in this problem because people in 2016 sat out their right to vote. We can never do that again. We have to be as arduous, as committed, as dedicated to voting as we are to the air we breathe.
What about you, Dr. Myers? I know I've heard you speak. Did you want to get your perspective in on this?
Well, very briefly, because Dr. Dunston, we're coming in towards the end of the program, and I know we have some wrap-up comments that you want to make about our initiatives and our pledge and everything. But just in general, I think we have to reach out to the young people, and all of us have to make a point that we at least can motivate people to take responsibility for getting 5 of their family members, friends, loved ones, Gen Zs, millennials to the polls. We've got to start a movement, and we've got to get the young people out there doing votercades and TikTok dancing. We've got to make it exciting. See, voting can be boring. When you look at that long ballot and you don't understand most of the provisions on it, it can be a little rough. And unless you have somebody like my friend Jan Perry on the ballot, you might say, the heck with this. So just in wrapping up, I'd like to thank our guests for coming on and hand things back to you. And let's try to find a way to get our young people out in the streets.
Yes. Well, thank you, Dr. Myers. I want to say that good trouble is indeed on time, on point, and on purpose as we head into the 2022 midterm elections. And no one other than our former Congressman, John Lewis, made it clearer that if we see something that is not right, his words say, we must say something. We must do something, because we know that this democracy that our speakers have spoken about so eloquently, this democracy is not a state. It is an act. And each generation must do its part to help build what we call the beloved community, a nation and world society at peace with itself. Our next podcast coming up will feature intergenerational perspective, and we particularly want to bring our Gen Zs on. For those, some of those who Gen Zs that's participating for the first time in this 2022, they are inspiring when they recognize that the mantle has been passed to them to make the change in Congress that is so much a part of the issues that we are faced today with the Supreme Court. We are getting our civics lesson on why midterm votes matter. When we see what's happening in our Congress and our Gen Zs that are beginning to run for office and calling other Gen Zers in, that the power is in this generation to change the Congress, our legislators, the ones who make the laws. This intergenerational power of our young people to see that it's in their hands to change the Congress is key here. Towards this end, I would just like to invite everyone listening to this podcast to go to the Black Women for Positive Change website and to take the John Lewis Good Trouble Pledge. It is a pledge that recognizes that we as citizens of the United States of America have a constitutional right to vote in all local, state, and national elections. Indeed, it is our birthright. I like to say it's our genome right. It's our inheritance to pursue life, liberty, happiness, and equal rights under the law, the supreme law of life. We ask you to accept and assume full responsibility to vote in every election and encourage others, as Dr. Myers has said, to do the same, regardless of race, political affiliation, or creed. Voting is our most non-violent form of protest. To download the pledge, to take the pledge, and then the email address to just send us back a record that you took the pledge. We want to blanket this nation with signees of the John Lewis Good Trouble. It's time for us as a people to get in good trouble for voting rights.
And let me just jump in here and give everyone the website to go to get the pledge, www.blackwomenforpositivechange.org. And you'll see the pledge posted there, and you can download it and do as Dr. Dunston has said, sign it and send it back to our email address. So I believe we've reached our point, Dr. Dunston, in wrapping up. And thank you very much to everyone. And do you have any closing remarks? And we can kind of wrap up here.
Well, I'll certainly defer to our honored guest, Honorable Jan Perry, if you have a closing remark, and then I would ask you to close out closing remarks, Barbara, if you have anything to say, okay? Yes.
All I
Jan.
want to say is that let's follow the lead of young people and use technology to our advantage in gathering information and educating ourselves, not only on voting, but to understand sources of money and how money and special interest controls or is attempting to control our lives through the act of voting and the political process. So let's learn from the young people, from the Gen Zs and the millennials on how they use technology to gather information and create a better dialogue between generations so that we can get to the truth and act accordingly and vote accordingly.
Thank you. Thank you. Attorney?
Yes,
Arnwine?
and I just want to say to everyone that this is our combined battle.
Yes.
And every one of us has to be on this battlefield for voting rights. And what I'm happy about is that I'm traveling the nation and I see the energy that's on the ground right now in various places. And we have been working with groups. We're about to do a national tour through many states in the country. A number of us are going to be doing that. I'm very proud of the young people in Georgia who are about to lead a 184-mile march for voting. Nothing but young folks. These are students who are organizing this march, and Florida wants to do the same thing. So there's all kinds of energy that's out there that we gotta just make sure people are aware of, and that we keep it moving. And we got months to go, but it's sooner than we think. So I am just glad to be part of this. I look forward to working with Black Women for Positive Change, working with all the other amazing organizations out there who are on this battlefront. We are going to win because we know, and part of our genetics and our genome is the ability to fight and win. In the name of Harriet, thank you. In the name of John Lewis, thank you for this opportunity.
Thank you. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you. Thank you, everyone.
Midterm votes matter.